Hi, good evening. I'm Dr. Philip McMillan. Thank you for joining me. And today I'm reflecting on COVID heroes, people who stood up against the tide and made a statement and actually made a difference. Now, sometimes heroes don't know they're heroes, they are just doing what they think is the right thing to do. And in this moment, because about 2 years ago, this doctor, Dr. Steve James, stood up against vaccine mandates in the UK for the NHS, the National Health Service. It was a very unusual moment that was captured. And for those people who don't quite know what happened, I'm just going to take you through a few steps to show you what he was thinking before he did it and what he actually did. I'm going to also highlight the BBC response because not long after he did this, you had a very clear response from the BBC where they fact checked what he said when he challenged the health secretary. So I'll come back to that afterwards. But the first thing is to understand exactly what he was thinking and what he was doing. And the background is essentially so he's a consultant anesthetist, and he just happened to be on call. He'll tell you the story as to why he did what he did at that point. So I'll just let you listen to it and then we'll take you back through it afterwards. Listen to what he was thinking before he did the presentation.
Yesterday, Together Declaration posted the video of me talking to Sajid Javid. Sometimes there are questions about what happened that day and whether it was set up, so I thought I'd just give you a bit of background. I was told that morning that Sajid Javid was coming into the hospital and would visit the intensive care where I was the consultant on call that day. I did think to myself, I'll talk to him about the vaccine mandate. It was an opportunity that I wasn't going to miss. Before he came in, the film crew was from AP News, not from Sky. We had a conversation before he came into the unit, and I told them that I wasn't vaccinated. So I wondered whether that would make them a bit more likely to record all the conversations. AP News is a recorder of information rather than a broadcaster. So when they had the video of the conversation with Sajid Javid, they would have then put it up to tender, and one broadcaster would then take it. Sky News took it, my assumption being that someone was going to run with it and they thought it would be a big story, which it turned out to be. So if anyone's got any questions about this and wants to really ask me if it was genuine or not, it was, and you can ask my colleagues who were fairly pissed off with me for doing it. I'm still in my job. King's hasn't given me a hard time for doing it. But if you want to talk to me in person, September the 1st, that's this Thursday.
I'll take it down there because that's an old video at the time. So he was going to meet with other people to discuss some of the points. So he was just highlighting what essentially had happened before this interview had occurred. So he was prepared. He knew the health minister was coming. It was early in January 2022. They had set that the vaccine mandates would kick in at the end of February 2022. What that meant is anyone who was not vaccinated in the clinical environment would no longer be able to work. And so there was a whole system that was set up across the world. People would have seen similar things, and there was tremendous pressure on the staff to therefore become vaccinated at that point. So when you see someone then stand in that gap and make statements like that, it really sticks with people because he made a stand. The point I'm making is that your voice matters. Even though you may not necessarily think your voice matters, it does. My voice matters. Sometimes I forget that. Maybe somebody is listening to what I say. I don't know. But that he did was inspiring for many people across the country. And believe it or not, he changed the trajectory of what happened in the NHS around vaccine mandates. So to understand exactly what he did, so remember the background, he's working in this hospital. He knows that the health minister, Sajid Javid, is coming along. They are talking about health related stuff. He sees this as an opportunity. He has prepared the cameraman that he's likely to challenge the health secretary on vaccine mandates. And then he waits for the opportunity. Look and see what happens in real time.
Do you think of the new rule to require vaccination of all NHS staff?
I'm not happy about that. So,
You're not happy with it, tell me.
so I've had COVID at some point.
Yeah.
I've got antibodies.
Yeah.
I've been working on COVID ITU since the beginning. I have not had a vaccination. I do not want to have a vaccination. The vaccine's reducing transmission only for about 8 weeks with Delta. With Omicron it's probably less. And for that I would be dismissed if I don't have a vaccine. It's not, the science isn't strong enough.
That's your view. And your views? Do you have any view on that? I respect that, but there's also many
So I agree with
different views.
Yep, there's other views,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
and there's another colleague
Yeah.
who's also in the same position.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I understand that. And obviously we have to weigh all that up for both health and social care. And there will always be a debate about it. But it's
maybe there's an opportunity to reconsider with Omicron and the changing picture, or at least to nuance it and allow doctors who've had antibody exposure, who've got antibodies, who haven't had the vaccination, to not have it, because the protection I've got from transmission is probably equivalent to someone who's vaccinated.
Yeah, but at some point that will wane as well.
But if you want to provide protection with a booster, you'd have to inject everybody every month. If it's worn off by 2 months, if the protection's worn off for transmission after 2 months, then after a month you've still got a bit of protection. So if you want to maintain protection, you're going to need to boost all staff members every single month, which you're not going to do.
No, we take advice on how much you may.
But it's not going to achieve a practical benefit.
Well, we take the very best advice that we can.
I understand, but you're
from the people that are
blinded
vaccine
to this.
experts.
So that was the situation. And when I say that he was ready, he was ready. He knew what he wanted to say. He knew he had a short window to get it in, and he hammered it in. And it's not without risk, because his job was at risk. And he then started to get criticism from outside that. So this is where, say, for instance, right after this, you have the BBC fact checking what he said, because they realized that there was quite a significant social media response to this. So this was the 10th of January 2022. So it was not long after he had done this challenge. And so this is here Dr. Steve James. This is the health minister here. This is some of the staff in the background in that intensive care unit. And so they challenged what he was saying. They highlighted the fact that he was saying that the unvaccinated person could still be just as protected. They said that was wrong. And it's fascinating how history works, because at that time, it was clear that there was a problem with Omicron. Whatever was happening with Delta before that, and the vaccine was based on the Wuhan variant, there was some benefit against Delta. But when Omicron came, it was very clear early on that there was a significant percentage of breakthrough infection, even within a short period of time. And so he was bringing that up and saying, well, actually, now that we have Omicron, this is a significant transition in the pandemic. Does it still apply? And he raised that question that was very, very uncomfortable. So at that point, they still were pushing back. And you can see here in the BBC article, they were saying that one paper found those who were vaccinated with Pfizer were 85% less likely than the unvaccinated to be infected with COVID after 2 weeks. 2 weeks, can you believe it? And so they were using this to say, no, absolutely, people had to get vaccinated. But as I said, it was very clear at that point that the vaccine couldn't control Omicron. And we're seeing this more and more as the variants come through, that it is getting more and more difficult, even with the updated vaccines, to control the spread of Omicron. Now, some people will argue that we're not seeing any impact, but you have to remember that the vaccines have impacted on the severity of COVID 19. So, the very severe presentations where patients come in with severe lung disease end up on ITU, I think that there's strong evidence that the vaccine has impacted on that. But here's my proviso: I am not actually sure that it has necessarily reduced all cause mortality because excess deaths are up. So we do need to clarify. So at that point, there was some argument, but to mandate it against almost 10% of their working population would have lost their jobs if they had continued to push through with that. Now, at that point, he was one person standing up to the health secretary. So, what happened after that was quite remarkable because subsequent to that, by the time we have now reached the 1st of March, when this was supposed to kick in, the regulations making COVID 19 vaccination a condition of deployment to end was removed. So, effectively, from the 15th of March 2022, they said, actually, no, we're not going to do that. And one of the interesting things, because I then looked back and tried to think to myself, did it actually have an impact through that discussion to the health secretary? Did it actually impact him, or was it something else? But again, and you'll find this in the description, this was the statement from the then Health Secretary of State, Sajid Javid, and he recognized that they had approved legislation requiring vaccination as a condition of deployment. But on the 31st of January, I announced the government intended to revoke the regulations making vaccination a condition of deployment in all health and social care settings, subject to consultation and parliamentary process. He actually pushed through the reversal of that mandate. Now, listen, this is very important. You have two sides of the puzzle here. You have one side where somebody has taken a stand, pushed back against the mandates or pushed back against something that they thought was wrong. On the other side, you had a politician, or you could say a leader, who was driving through a change. But when they were challenged, they stopped. They thought about it. They reflected on what was said. They took more advice and realized that actually this is not in the best interest of the public because you'd lose 10% of your working NHS staff. This is not in the interest of the individuals. And he probably realized that the consultant was correct. The science didn't match up. Politicians who change their direction based on a better understanding of science, even if it makes them look less effective, are the kinds of politicians that we need. And I think that what he did there as the health secretary to make that turn, that transition from where he was after that conversation, shows the incredible characteristics of a leader who actually is willing to listen to people. So, on both counts, there are actually two heroes. One was the doctor who stood up, the other one, surprisingly, was the politician who listened and then changed the direction of the mandates. History will show that that was the correct thing to do. Because as we now understand, they were thinking at the time that hybrid immunity was more effective. How could hybrid immunity be more effective than a natural infection? How could that consultant who was in intensive care seeing COVID patients for 2 years suddenly now at that point need to have something to make his immunity better? Anyone who says that doesn't understand science. I will say this absolutely clearly. Natural immunity is always superior to any form of vaccine-mediated immunity. It doesn't mean that vaccine-mediated immunity is not actually good. What it means is that it can't be compared. If somebody just had measles, you don't go and vaccinate them. If somebody had chickenpox, you don't go and vaccinate them, because you recognize that the immune system actually has a very sophisticated, comprehensive response to an infection. And just as with clotting, too little and too much are diseases. It's the same with immunity. Too little immunity, you get many infections. Too much immunity, you get damage. And so therefore, there is no such thing as being able to optimize the natural immune response unless somebody has a poor immune response in the first place. That's where. But it's really important from the scientific point of view to remember these points. I wonder what people are going to say to their grandchildren 30 to 40 years from now when they ask them, what were you thinking when you said or did these things? Where was the science? Had you forgotten what you learned? What was it that made you step into ideology? That's effectively what has happened throughout the pandemic. Too much ideology, not enough science. That's the mistake that was made. Science just asks questions. It's not attached to political views, it's just observant, and it follows outcomes. That's the lesson that we must take from this situation. Let us never get in a position again where we are not following science. Let's ask the hard questions, even when they're inconvenient, even when they challenge what we have done, even when it may be that we could be wrong. That's okay. Science is always happy when things are wrong because it gets to the truth. So, my thank you to Dr. Steve James, a COVID hero who made his voice matter, stood up, made a trajectory for the health system in the UK just by raising his voice. Remember this, everyone. Your voice as well matters. Make sure that you use it as best as you can. Have a great evening.